I would rather chew glass than touch that desperate cow. Those were the exact venomous words my future son-in-law used to describe my daughter. I stood frozen in the shadows of the hotel terrace, listening as he and his best man laughed and clinked their imported champagne glasses, celebrating what they thought was the perfect con. He bragged that every time he had to be near her, he just closed his eyes, pictured my $5 million trust fund, and swallowed his disgust. They thought they had secured a gold mine. They thought I was just a clueless, wealthy old man ready to hand over his legacy. But they were about to learn a brutal lesson. You do not cross a man who spent his entire life crushing corporate rivals in the Denver real estate market. I was going to tear his life apart piece by piece, and he would never even see it coming. My name is Victor Gallagher. I am 70 years old. I did not inherit a single dime, and I certainly was not handed my success on a silver platter. I built a commercial real estate empire from the dirt up. I spent 40 years breathing concrete dust, navigating cutthroat negotiations, and fighting tooth and nail to secure a future for my family. I did it all for my wife, who passed away 10 years ago, and for our daughter, Brooke. Brooke is 32 years old, an incredibly talented art director, and she has the kindest, most forgiving heart of anyone I have ever known. But life has been unspeakably cruel to her. When her mother died, the grief shattered Brooke. It swallowed her whole. She spiraled into a deep, dark depression, and during those painful years, she struggled heavily with a medical condition that caused severe weight gain. It became a profound, paralyzing insecurity for her. She hid behind baggy clothes and forced smiles, always feeling like she was not beautiful enough, not thin enough, not worthy of a genuine fairy tale romance. As a father, watching your child hate her own reflection is a helpless, agonizing pain. I tried everything to build her confidence. I paid for therapists, personal trainers, and wellness retreats, but those internal wounds run incredibly deep. Then a year ago, Trent Lawson entered her life. Trent was 34, a slick, handsome financial broker from New York who seemed to sweep her right off her feet. He wore tailored suits, spoke with calculated charm, and knew exactly what to say to make her blush. He bought her extravagant flowers, listened to her talk for hours, and made her feel like she was the absolute center of the universe. Tonight was supposed to be the culmination of her happiness. I had spent $80,000 to rent out the grand ballroom at the Brown Palace Hotel for their engagement party. The room was dripping in luxury. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, a classical string quartet played softly in the corner, and waiters passed around silver trays of caviar. Looking across the room, I saw Brooke glowing. She was wearing a stunning custom silk dress, laughing with her friends, looking happier and more radiant than I had seen her in a decade. I wanted to believe Trent was the real deal. I desperately wanted to believe that the universe was finally giving my little girl her happily ever after. But my instincts, honed by decades of dealing with liars and frauds in the corporate world, kept nagging at me. There was something about Trent that felt hollow, a calculated smoothness and emptiness behind his practiced smiles, a way his eyes darted around the room, evaluating people's net worth rather than making genuine connections. I tried to push the feeling down, telling myself I was just being a paranoid, overprotective father. The ballroom was suffocatingly loud, vibrating with heavy music and the endless chatter of 150 very important guests. I needed a moment of quiet to clear my head. I grabbed a premium cigar from my jacket pocket and slipped out the heavy glass doors onto the dimly lit terrace. The cool, crisp Denver night air was a welcome relief. I walked toward the far corner, staying hidden in the deep shadows of a large decorative stone planter, simply wanting to smoke my cigar in peace. Before I could even strike a match, I heard voices floating over from the adjacent secluded section of the balcony. It was Trent and his best man, a loudmouth guy named Bradley. They were smoking cigarettes and leaning casually against the stone railing. I froze instinctively, stepping deeper into the shadows. Something in their hushed, arrogant tone made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Bradley let out a low, mocking whistle. He patted Trent on the back and laughed. "You actually pulled it off, man. I have to hand it to you. You really bagged yourself a gold mine. But seriously, how are you going to handle the wedding night? I mean, all that weight. How do you stomach it? My blood turned to absolute ice. I stopped breathing. I waited for Trent, the man who had looked me in the eye, and asked for my daughter's hand just 2 months ago to defend her. I waited for him to snap, to punch Bradley in the jaw, to defend the honor of the woman he supposedly loved with all his heart. Instead, Trent let out a cruel, chilling laugh. It was a sound so dark and empty, it made me physically sick to my stomach. He took a slow drag of his cigarette, exhaled a cloud of smoke into the night air, and replied in a cold, callous voice, "I would rather chew glass than touch that desperate cow. Trust me, it takes everything I have just to hold her sweaty hand in public." But hey, every time I close my eyes, I just picture old Victor's $5 million trust fund, and I swallow it down. It is a small price to pay for an early retirement. They both erupted into a fit of laughter, clinking their glasses together to celebrate their brilliant, twisted scheme. I stood there in the dark, my hands balled into fists so tight, my fingernails cut deep into my palms. A blind, primal rage surged through my chest. My vision tunneled. Every protective instinct I had as a father screamed at me to kick that glass door open, drag Trent by his expensive silk collar, and throw him right over the stone balcony. I wanted to beat him until he could not speak. I wanted to destroy him right there on the spot. My sweet, gentle Brooke. She was inside that ballroom right now, smiling proudly, showing off her diamond ring to our relatives, believing with all her heart that she had finally found true love. And this parasite, this absolute scum, was out here treating her like a walking bank account, ruthlessly mocking her deepest insecurities, just to impress his friend. I took a step towards the light. I was ready to end it all. But then the cold, calculating mind of Victor Gallagher took over. The businessman who had survived 40 years of corporate warfare intervened. I stopped dead in my tracks. I realized that if I walked out there and caused a public scene, Brooke would be humiliated in front of 150 people. It would utterly break her fragile heart. And worse, Trent would immediately play the victim. He would spin a brilliant lie. He would tell her I misunderstood the conversation, that I was just a controlling, paranoid old man trying to sabotage her happiness. And because she was so desperate for validation and love, she might actually believe him. She might hate me for ruining her fairy tale. No. Violence and screaming would only give him an exit. It would give him a chance to manipulate the narrative. If I was going to crush Trent Lawson, I had to do it the right way. I had to do it quietly, methodically, and with absolute legal and financial precision. I needed to strip him of his pride, his money, and his future, leaving him with absolutely nothing. I took a deep, silent breath, letting the fiery rage settle into a freezing, calculated focus. I put the unlit cigar back into my pocket. I turned around and slipped back into the ballroom, completely unseen by the two men on the balcony. I walked over to the open bar, ordered a club soda with a steady hand, and waited. A few minutes later, I watched Trent walk back inside. He smoothed his tailored jacket, walked right up to my daughter, and flashed that perfect fake smile, wrapping his arm securely around her waist. "Enjoy the champagne, Trent," I thought to myself, as I watched him kiss her cheek. "Enjoy every single drop of this luxury, because starting tomorrow I am going to build a financial guillotine, and I am going to make you place your own head right inside it." The morning sun cut through the heavy mahogany blinds of my home office. The house was quiet, still recovering from the extravagance of the engagement party the night before. I sat behind my desk, a massive slab of reclaimed walnut that had seen decades of signed contracts, broken partnerships, and hard-fought victories. My knuckles were still white. I had not slept a single wink. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that parasite laughing on the terrace. I poured myself a black coffee, staring at the financial portfolios spread out across my desk, waiting for the sound of footsteps in the hallway. The heavy oak door swung open with a soft click, and Trent stepped into the room. He looked the part of the perfect, respectful future son-in-law. He wore a crisp, light blue button-down shirt, his hair perfectly styled, holding a cup of herbal tea. He smiled warmly, displaying that practiced hollow expression I had grown to despise overnight. "Good morning, Victor," he said smoothly, taking a seat in one of the leather chairs opposite my desk. "Thank you again for last night. Brooke is over the moon. She is still upstairs, resting, but I wanted to come down and properly thank you. The party was absolutely flawless." I looked at him over the rim of my coffee mug. I let the silence stretch. In real estate negotiations, silence is a weapon. It makes the weak start talking. But Trent just sat there maintaining relaxed, polite eye contact. He was good. Very good. "I am glad you enjoyed it, Trent," I replied, clapping my voice low and steady. I stepped out onto the terrace for a smoke around midnight. It was getting a bit loud inside. I happened to be standing near the stone planters when you and Bradley came out. I watched his face closely. A micro-expression of panic flickered across his eyes, gone in less than a second. His jaw muscles tightened just a fraction. "Oh, you were out there?" he asked, his tone perfectly casual. "I did not see you. It was a beautiful night for a cigar." "It was," I said, leaning forward slightly. "I could not help but overhear a piece of your conversation. Something about chewing glass. Something about a desperate cow. I have to admit, Trent, it sounded like a rather harsh way to speak at your own engagement party. I am just trying to understand the context." He did not flinch. He did not stutter. Instead, his eyes widened with what looked like genuine, profound embarrassment. He let out a long, heavy sigh and rubbed the bridge of his nose, acting like a man burdened by a terrible weight. "Victor, I am so sorry you had to hear that," he said, his voice dripping with manufactured sincerity. I was incredibly frustrated, and I used completely unprofessional language. "Bradley was asking me about work, about my brokerage firm." "Your firm," I repeated flatly. "Yes." He continued, leaning in, his expression earnest. "We have this high-net-worth client. She is notoriously difficult. Behind closed doors, the junior brokers call her the cow. It is a terrible nickname, I know, but she is ruthless. She has been making highly inappropriate, aggressive advances toward me for months, threatening to pull her accounts if I do not entertain her personal invitations. I have been putting up with her verbal abuse because the commission structure is vital for my future, for Brooke's future. I was just venting to Bradley. I told him I would rather chew glass than touch her. But I swallow my pride and deal with the humiliation because I want to bring real wealth into this marriage." It was a flawless lie. The delivery was impeccable. He painted himself as the long-suffering, loyal provider, enduring sexual harassment in the corporate trenches just to provide for my daughter. If I had not lived through 40 years of corporate warfare, if I had not heard the greedy, mocking tone in his voice the night before, I might have actually believed him. Before I could dissect his story, the office door swung wide open. Brooke stood in the doorway wearing her comfortable morning robe, holding a cup of coffee. Her face was flushed, her eyes darting between me and Trent. "What is going on in here?" Brooke asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "I heard you talking about Trent's client." "Dad, why are you interrogating him the morning after our engagement party?" Trent immediately stood up and walked over to her, wrapping a protective, comforting arm around her shoulders. "It is fine, sweetheart," Trent murmured gently, kissing the top of her head. "Your father just overheard me venting to Bradley last night about that awful client." He was understandably concerned. Brooke pulled away from his embrace just enough to look at me, her expression turning into a glare of deep betrayal. "Dad, you were eavesdropping on him, and now you are dragging him into your office to grill him. Trent has been miserable for weeks because of that woman at his firm. He has been working 80-hour weeks, putting up with absolute garbage from his clients, all so he can build a life for us. And instead of supporting him, you are treating him like a hostile witness in a boardroom." "Brooke," I began, keeping my voice calm. I was merely asking a question. "No, you were doing what you always do," she interrupted, her voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and anger. "You let your ruthless corporate paranoia infect everything. You spend your whole life assuming everyone is out to get you, out to steal from you. Trent left his entire established life in New York to move to Denver for me. He loves me. He treats me like I am beautiful, like I am worthy. Why can you not just be happy for me? Why do you have to search for hidden agendas where there are none? I looked at my daughter. My sweet, vulnerable daughter. The years of hiding her body in oversized sweaters, the quiet tears after failed diets, the deep-rooted belief that no handsome, successful man could ever genuinely want her. Trent had weaponized all of it. He had built an impenetrable fortress out of her insecurities. As Brooke stood there wiping an angry tear from her cheek, I looked at Trent. He was holding her close, playing the supportive rock. But over her shoulder, completely hidden from her view, he looked directly at me. And he smirked. It was a small, arrogant, terrifyingly confident smirk. The smirk of a predator who knows he has the prey completely under his control. The smirk of a man telling me, "Your daughter is mine, old man, and there is absolutely nothing you can do about it." In that fraction of a second, I knew that if I pushed the issue, if I called him a liar right now, Brooke would pack her bags and leave this house with him today. She would choose the man who validated her over the father who questioned him. Trent would win the immediate battle, and I would lose my daughter forever. I had to swallow my pride. I had to play the game better than he did. "You are right, Brooke," I said quietly, letting my shoulders drop to simulate defeat. I rubbed my eyes, playing the part of the tired, overly protective father who had just realized his own foolishness. "I am sorry. I spent 40 years fighting off sharks in the commercial property sector. It is a hard habit to break. Trent, I apologize. I took a fragmented conversation out of context and I unfairly jumped to conclusions." Brooke's tense posture immediately softened. She let out a relieved breath and walked over, giving me a quick, forgiving hug. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered. "I just want us to be a real family." Trent offered a magnanimous, completely fake smile. "No apology necessary, Victor. You are just protecting your daughter. I would do the exact same thing in your shoes. I am just glad we cleared the air. We are family now." "Yes," I replied, returning a polite, measured smile. "We are family." Trent led Brooke out of the office, heading toward the kitchen for breakfast, leaving me alone once again in the quiet of my study. I slowly sat back down in my heavy leather chair. My heart was no longer racing with blind anger. It was beating with a slow, rhythmic, deadly purpose. Trent Lawson thought he had just outsmarted me. He thought his little performance had neutralized the threat. He believed that he had successfully manipulated the clueless, paranoid old man. He had no idea that I had just given him exactly what he wanted to see. I had lowered my guard to make him feel completely, dangerously invincible. He wanted to play corporate games with my family. He wanted to use my daughter's heart as a stepping stone to my wealth. I was going to let him step right up. I was going to agree with everything he said, support his ambitions, and welcome him into my financial world with wide open arms. And then when he was standing at the very top, comfortable and greedy, I was going to pull the floor out from under him. I am Charmaine, 35 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity, but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward, smirking. "You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders. But inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our 4-bedroom house, with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool, was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's insistence despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in prison. From elementary school through high school, I maintained straight, as joined honor societies, and participated in every extracurricular activity they demanded. Nothing was ever enough for Elaine. My older brother Richard was the golden child. He was handsome, charismatic, and completely irresponsible. He coasted through college on my parents' money while I worked 2 jobs to fund my computer science degree. When Richard launched a failed startup, my parents remortgaged their home to bail him out. When I launched my software company from a cramped apartment, they told me to get a real job. Over the past decade, my software firm revolutionized inventory logistics for massive retail chains. I quietly amassed a net worth of over $12 million. Meanwhile, my parents' reckless spending and Richard's endless failures finally caught up with them. 3 years ago, they were on the verge of total bankruptcy. They were days away from losing the cherished lakefront cabin that had been in our family for 4 generations. Desperate, my mother called me weeping on the phone, begging for a loan. I did not give them a loan. I bought the cabin outright, paying off their massive debts in the process. I allowed them to continue using it, acting as if nothing had changed to preserve their precious social image. I even set up an automatic payment system through my company to cover their premium credit cards, ensuring they could still afford their country club memberships and weekly brunches. I thought my generosity might finally earn their respect. I thought saving our family legacy would finally make me worthy of their love. I was completely wrong. My financial support only fueled their deep resentment. They hated that the daughter they always looked down on was now their silent savior. They masked their humiliation by treating me worse than ever. That brings me back to last Sunday. The upscale brunch was supposed to be a rare family gathering to celebrate Richard's recent promotion at a mid-level marketing firm. I sat across from him watching him brag about his new salary, completely ignoring the fact that I was still paying off the car he drove to the restaurant. Elaine sat at the head of the table wearing a designer silk blouse I had technically paid for. She spent the entire meal criticizing my appearance, my career, and my lack of a husband. I sat quietly absorbing the insults, hoping the tension would pass. Then Elaine leaned forward and delivered the final blow. "You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." Richard laughed aloud, raising his mimosa glass in agreement. In that exact moment, something fundamental inside me finally broke. The desperate, lonely child seeking her mother's approval died entirely. A cold, analytical software developer took her place. I did not argue. I did not scream. I simply sipped my coffee, smiled politely, and told them I had a lot of work to do. I paid the exorbitant bill, walked out to my car, and drove home with absolute clarity. The era of my silent suffering was officially over. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my laptop. My fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced precision. I logged into the master administrative portal for the family credit accounts. With 3 simple clicks, I completely severed their access. I zeroed out the spending limits on the platinum cards, canceled the automatic utility payments for their sprawling colonial home, and permanently revoked Richard's access to the emergency fund. Then, I opened my email and drafted a highly urgent message to my real estate attorney. I instructed him to immediately list the lakefront cabin for sale at 5% below market value to ensure a rapid, aggressive cash buyer. I explicitly ordered him to send formal certified eviction notices to my parents and my brother, giving them exactly 30 days to remove their personal belongings from the property. I hit send, closed my laptop, and poured myself a glass of red wine. For the first time in 35 years, I felt completely free. The trap was set, the execution was entirely legal, and the impending fallout was going to be magnificent. I went to bed and slept with the profound peace of someone who had just taken their life back. The absolute chaos erupted the very next morning. It started precisely at 9 o'clock. I was sitting at my kitchen island, calmly reviewing coding architecture for a new client, when my cell phone began to vibrate violently across the marble countertop. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. Within 10 minutes, I had 14 missed calls and 6 frantic text messages. The first text from Elaine was confused and annoyed. She demanded to know why her platinum card was violently declined at the luxury salon. The second text, arriving 5 minutes later, was laced with rising panic. She said the bank told her the master account administrator had permanently frozen the line of credit. Then a text from Richard arrived. He furiously demanded to know why his automatic car payment had bounced, threatening to ruin his credit score. I smiled, taking a slow sip of my hot coffee. They were finally experiencing the terrifying reality of life without my invisible safety net. They thought I was a pathetic, desperate woman who needed their pity to survive. They had absolutely no idea that I was the only thing standing between their arrogant, privileged lives and total financial ruin. I picked up my phone, swiped to open the messaging application, and typed a single, perfectly calculated response to our family group chat. I told them that pity certainly goes a very long way, but my profound financial charity permanently ends today. I told them to thoroughly enjoy the harsh reality of the real world. I blocked their numbers, turned off my screen, and finally breathed. The ruthless, glorious process of dismantling their toxic delusion had officially begun. I would never be their victim. I did not have to wait long for his next move. In the commercial real estate business, when a man is cornered, he always accelerates his timeline. He tries to close the deal before the foundation cracks. Trent did exactly that. Just 3 days after the engagement party, I was sitting in the living room reading the morning paper when Brooke came bounding down the stairs. Trent was right behind her, holding her hand, looking like the picture of devoted affection. Brooke's eyes were shining with tears of joy. She sat next to me on the sofa and announced that they did not want to wait a whole year to get married. Trent had convinced her that a long engagement was unnecessary, that he simply could not wait another 12 months to call her his wife. He told her he did not care about the grand planning or the perfect season. He just wanted her. Brooke was completely captivated. For a woman who had spent a decade feeling invisible, the idea of a handsome, successful man being so desperate to marry her that he could not wait was intoxicating. She told me they wanted to move the wedding up by 3 months. I smiled warmly, setting my newspaper aside. Inside, my instincts were sounding loud, blaring alarms. Moving a luxury wedding up by 3 months is a logistical nightmare, and it requires a massive injection of immediate cash to secure vendors on short notice. A rushed timeline means someone is desperate. It means someone is running out of time. But I did not show a single ounce of doubt. I reached out, took my daughter by the hand, and told her that nothing would make me happier than seeing her walk down the aisle sooner. I pulled out my checkbook right there in the living room and wrote the deposits to secure the accelerated dates. I handed the checks to Trent, thanking him for making my daughter so incredibly happy. He took the money with a gracious nod, completely unaware that he had just handed me the master key to his own destruction. By rushing the timeline, he confirmed he was operating under extreme pressure. He was vulnerable. And a vulnerable opponent always makes catastrophic mistakes. His fatal mistake came exactly 1 week later. It was a quiet Thursday evening. Brooke had gone out to meet with her bridal dress designer, leaving Trent and me alone in the house. I was in my study going over quarterly reports for my remaining commercial properties when a soft knock sounded at the door. Trent walked in, holding a sleek, leather-bound portfolio. He had a serious, respectful expression on his face. He asked if I had a moment to discuss something important man to man. I gestured to the leather chair across from my desk, offering him a glass of scotch. He accepted, swirling the amber liquid before taking a steadying breath. He began his pitch. He told me that moving to Denver for Brooke was the best decision he had ever made, but he wanted to bring more to the table. He said he did not just want to be a successful broker working for someone else. He wanted to build an empire of his own. He looked me right in the eyes, adopting a tone of deep, practiced humility. He told me he wanted to be worthy of my daughter, to build a legacy that could stand alongside the Gallagher name. Then he slid the leather portfolio across my heavy walnut desk. It was a business plan for a revolutionary financial technology startup, a fintech platform that supposedly utilized advanced algorithmic trading to maximize short-term yields for high-net-worth individuals. Trent explained that he had inside access to the developmental team and the opportunity to secure a majority stake before the company went public. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, he said, but the buy-in window was closing rapidly. He needed $3.5 million to secure the controlling shares. He framed it not as a favor, but as an exclusive partnership. He offered me a chance to invest with him, promising returns that would double my money in 18 months. I opened the portfolio and slowly turned the pages. The presentation was visually flawless. High-quality graphics, complex market projections, and pages of impressive financial jargon. To a layman, it would have looked like the opportunity of a lifetime. But to a veteran developer who had spent 40 years acquiring companies, dismantling corporate structures, and auditing financial ledgers, the red flags were glaringly obvious. I did not just read the numbers, I read the structure behind the numbers. The cash flow projections were heavily encrypted, hiding the actual origin and destination of the funds. The parent companies listed in the corporate hierarchy were anonymous shell corporations registered in Delaware, a notorious haven for hiding true ownership. The operating margins made absolutely no sense for a company in the developmental stage. Trent did not need startup capital. This was not an investment in technology or human resources. He needed liquid cash, and he needed it immediately. He was trying to wash $3.5 million through a maze of dummy corporations. My mind raced, calculating the sheer audacity of his plan. He was sitting in my own house, drinking my scotch, trying to con me out of millions to cover whatever dark hole he had dug for himself. I kept my face entirely neutral. I did not let my eyes narrow, and I did not let my jaw clench. I turned the final page, closed the leather portfolio, and let out a long, impressed whistle. I looked at Trent, letting a wide, admiring smile spread across my face. "Trent," I said, my voice thick with genuine-sounding awe. "I have to admit, this is one of the most brilliant proposals I have seen in a very long time. You have a sharp mind for market disruption." Trent relaxed, a triumphant gleam flashing in his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, taking a confident sip of his scotch. "I knew you would see the vision, Victor. It is a bold move, but the market is ripe for it." "It is indeed," I agreed, tapping the leather portfolio with my index finger. "In fact, I think $3.5 million is too conservative for an operation of this magnitude. I want to ensure you have the absolute capital advantage. I will give you $4 million. Trent stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. His greed was a physical, palpable thing in the room. He was completely blinded by the sight of the finish line. "However," I added smoothly, raising a single finger, "I have strict protocols for capital ventures. My personal attorney will draft the final paperwork to structure the transfer. Standard procedure." "Of course," Trent replied quickly, unable to hide his eager, victorious smile. "Whatever you need." He took the bait. I watched him walk out, knowing I owned his entire future. The trap was set perfectly, and he had just willingly locked himself right inside of it now. I did not have to wait long for his next move. In the commercial real estate business, when a man is cornered, he always accelerates his timeline. He tries to close the deal before the foundation cracks. Trent did exactly that. Just 3 days after the engagement party, I was sitting in the living room reading the morning paper when Brooke came bounding down the stairs. Trent was right behind her, holding her hand, looking like the picture of devoted affection. Brooke's eyes were shining with tears of joy. She sat next to me on the sofa and announced that they did not want to wait a whole year to get married. Trent had convinced her that a long engagement was unnecessary, that he simply could not wait another 12 months to call her his wife. He told her he did not care about the grand planning or the perfect season. He just wanted her. Brooke was completely captivated. For a woman who had spent a decade feeling invisible, the idea of a handsome, successful man being so desperate to marry her that he could not wait was intoxicating. She told me they wanted to move the wedding up by 3 months. I smiled warmly, setting my newspaper aside. Inside, my instincts were sounding loud, blaring alarms. Moving a luxury wedding up by 3 months is a logistical nightmare, and it requires a massive injection of immediate cash to secure vendors on short notice. A rushed timeline means someone is desperate. It means someone is running out of time. But I did not show a single ounce of doubt. I reached out, took my daughter by the hand, and told her that nothing would make me happier than seeing her walk down the aisle sooner. I pulled out my checkbook right there in the living room and wrote the deposits to secure the accelerated dates. I handed the checks to Trent, thanking him for making my daughter so incredibly happy. He took the money with a gracious nod, completely unaware that he had just handed me the master key to his own destruction. By rushing the timeline, he confirmed he was operating under extreme pressure. He was vulnerable, and a vulnerable opponent always makes catastrophic mistakes. His fatal mistake came exactly 1 week later. It was a quiet Thursday evening. Brooke had gone out to meet with her bridal dress designer, leaving Trent and me alone in the house. I was in my study going over quarterly reports for my remaining commercial properties when a soft knock sounded at the door. Trent walked in holding a sleek leather-bound portfolio. He had a serious, respectful expression on his face. He asked if I had a moment to discuss something important man to man. I gestured to the leather chair across from my desk, offering him a glass of scotch. He accepted, swirling the amber liquid, before taking a steadying breath. He began his pitch. He told me that moving to Denver for Brooke was the best decision he had ever made, but he wanted to bring more to the table. He said he did not just want to be a successful broker working for someone else. He wanted to build an empire of his own. He looked me right in the eyes, adopting a tone of deep, practiced humility. He told me he wanted to be worthy of my daughter, to build a legacy that could stand alongside the Gallagher name. Then he slid the leather portfolio across my heavy walnut desk. It was a business plan for a revolutionary financial technology startup, a fintech platform that supposedly utilized advanced algorithmic trading to maximize short-term yields for high-net-worth individuals. Trent explained that he had inside access to the developmental team and the opportunity to secure a majority stake before the company went public. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance, he said, but the buy-in window was closing rapidly. He needed $3.5 million to secure the controlling shares. He framed it not as a favor, but as an exclusive partnership. He offered me a chance to invest with him, promising returns that would double my money in 18 months. I opened the portfolio and slowly turned the pages. The presentation was visually flawless. High-quality graphics, complex market projections, and pages of impressive financial jargon. To a layman, it would have looked like the opportunity of a lifetime. But to a veteran developer who had spent 40 years acquiring companies, dismantling corporate structures, and auditing financial ledgers, the red flags were glaringly obvious. I did not just read the numbers. I read the structure behind the numbers. The cash flow projections were heavily encrypted, hiding the actual origin and destination of the funds. The parent companies listed in the corporate hierarchy were anonymous shell corporations registered in Delaware, a notorious haven for hiding true ownership. The operating margins made absolutely no sense for a company in the developmental stage. Trent did not need startup capital. This was not an investment in technology or human resources. He needed liquid cash, and he needed it immediately. He was trying to wash $3.5 million through a maze of dummy corporations. My mind raced, calculating the sheer audacity of his plan. He was sitting in my own house drinking my scotch, trying to con me out of millions to cover whatever dark hole he had dug for himself. I kept my face entirely neutral. I did not let my eyes narrow, and I did not let my jaw clench. I turned the final page, closed the leather portfolio, and let out a long, impressed whistle. I looked at Trent, letting a wide, admiring smile spread across my face. "Trent," I said, my voice thick with genuine-sounding awe, I have to admit this is one of the most brilliant proposals I have seen in a very long time. You have a sharp mind for market disruption." Trent relaxed, a triumphant gleam flashing in his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, taking a confident sip of his scotch. "I knew you would see the vision, Victor. It is a bold move, but the market is ripe for it." "It is indeed," I agreed, tapping the leather portfolio with my index finger. "In fact, I think 3.5 million is too conservative for an operation of this magnitude. I want to ensure you have the absolute capital advantage. I will give you $4 million. Trent stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. His greed was a physical, palpable thing in the room. He was completely blinded by the sight of the finish line. "However," I added, smoothly raising a single finger, "I have strict protocols for capital ventures. My personal attorney will draft the final paperwork to structure the transfer. Standard procedure." "Of course," Trent replied quickly, unable to hide his eager, victorious smile. "Whatever you need." The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind Trent, the warm grandfatherly smile vanished from my face. I waited exactly 10 minutes, listening to his footsteps retreat down the hallway, listening to the faint hum of his sports car starting in the driveway as he left to run his evening errands. Once the house was completely silent, I picked up my cell phone. I did not call my standard corporate legal team. The attorneys who managed my daily real estate acquisitions were excellent at drafting polite contracts and negotiating standard zoning permits, but they were not built for the kind of war I was about to wage. For this, I needed a butcher. I dialed a number I had not used in nearly 7 years. Harrison Knox did not have a flashy office in a glass skyscraper downtown. He operated out of a nondescript, brutalist brick building on the industrial edge of the city. Harrison was a remnant from my early days in the Denver development scene, back when securing a city contract required ruthless tactics and destroying a rival meant unearthing their deepest, darkest financial secrets. He was a fixer, a man who specialized in making massive problems disappear quietly and legally. He answered on the second ring, and I told him I needed to see him immediately. I drove my modest sedan through the dark, winding streets, leaving the affluent tranquility of my neighborhood far behind. When I walked into Harrison's dimly lit office, he was already waiting at a long metal conference table. Sitting beside him were 2 men I did not recognize, both wearing sharp, unremarkable gray suits. Harrison stood up, his face weathered and sharp, and shook my hand firmly. He introduced the 2 men as his elite forensic accounting team, specialists who spent their lives tracking hidden offshore assets and dismantling complex corporate fraud. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I dropped Trent's sleek leather portfolio right in the center of the cold metal table. I told Harrison that the man who had just asked to marry my daughter handed me that portfolio an hour ago. I explained that he was asking for $4 million to fund a revolutionary financial technology startup. Harrison opened the binder and skimmed the first few pages. A dry, humorless chuckle escaped his lips. He passed the document to his lead accountant, who adjusted his glasses and immediately zeroed in on the encrypted cash flow projections and the anonymous Delaware shell corporations. Within 3 minutes of flipping through the glossy pages, the accountant looked up and confirmed my exact suspicions. The entire proposal was a beautifully constructed phantom. It was a sophisticated laundering vehicle designed to swallow liquid cash and make it vanish without a trace. I leaned over the table and looked Harrison dead in the eye. I told him I did not just want a standard background check. A standard check would only show the polished, pristine identity Trent Lawson had carefully curated for the public. I needed them to rip his life apart at the seams. I wanted them to dig into the deepest, darkest corners of his financial history. I wanted to know where he bought his morning coffee, who he owed money to, and what kind of leverage he was hiding. I explicitly ordered them to pull his unlisted tax returns, trace the digital footprints of his supposedly dissolved limited liability companies, and find the real names hiding behind those anonymous offshore servers. Harrison nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of the situation. He knew this was not just a business transaction for me. This was about my daughter. This was about a predator who had infiltrated my home and threatened the only family I had left. Harrison reached into his desk drawer and pulled out 3 cheap, prepaid cell phones. He slid one across the table to me. He explained that from this moment forward, we would only communicate using these untraceable devices. Trent was clearly a master manipulator, and if he had the audacity to run a $4 million con inside my own house, there was a high probability he had the technical skills to monitor my primary communications. I took the cheap plastic phone and slipped it into my pocket, accepting the absolute secrecy of our arrangement. As I drove back to my sprawling quiet house, a heavy, suffocating weight settled over my chest. The easy part was over. Hiring the best tactical team money could buy was simple. The truly grueling, agonizing part was going to be the performance I had to put on at home. I had to walk back through my front door and play the role of the thrilled, unsuspecting father of the bride. I had to sit across the dining table from the man who called my daughter a desperate cow, and I had to smile at him. I had to suppress every primal urge to break his jaw, knowing that any slip of emotion would tip him off and ruin the trap. When I walked into the grand foyer, the house smelled of sweet vanilla and fresh eucalyptus. I found Brooke in the formal dining room. The massive mahogany table was completely covered in dozens of extravagant floral arrangements. There were white roses, delicate orchids, and imported lilies scattered everywhere. She was sitting in the middle of the beautiful chaos, a genuine, radiant smile illuminating her face as she carefully pinned a silk ribbon around a bridal bouquet. She looked up when I entered, her eyes sparkling with a kind of pure, unfiltered joy that I had not witnessed since her mother passed away. "Dad, look at these," she said, holding up a cascading arrangement of white orchids. Trent told the florist to import these specific flowers because he remembered me saying they were my absolute favorite when we first met. Can you believe he remembered a tiny detail like that? He is so incredibly thoughtful. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I looked at my beautiful, trusting daughter, so completely blinded by the manufactured affection of a sociopath. I walked over, forcing my facial muscles to relax into a warm, supportive expression. I picked up one of the delicate white roses, gently twirling the stem between my fingers. "They are absolutely stunning, sweetheart," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly steady. "He certainly knows exactly how to make you happy. You deserve a beautiful wedding, Brooke. You deserve everything to be absolutely perfect." She stood up and wrapped her arms around me, burying her face in my shoulder. "Thank you for supporting us, Dad," she whispered softly. "I know you had your doubts this morning, but it means the world to me that you are giving him a chance. We are going to build such a wonderful life together." I held my daughter tightly, resting my chin against her hair, staring blankly at the wall behind her. I felt the hard, rectangular outline of the prepaid burner phone pressing against my chest from inside my jacket pocket. While my daughter stood in my arms dreaming of her perfect future, my forensic team was sitting in a dark, windowless room, methodically hacking into her fiancé's encrypted life. I was actively funding a grand illusion just to keep her smiling for a few more days. It was a terrifying, isolating position to be in. I was playing a deeply deceptive game with the person I loved most in the world. But as I stroked her hair and praised the elegant floral arrangements, I knew I was making the only acceptable choice. A father's duty is not just to provide comfort. A father's duty is to stand in the dark and slaughter the wolves while his children sleep safely in the light. I smiled, helped her trim the stems of the imported lilies, and quietly waited for Harrison Knox to call and hand me the sword. The cheap plastic burner phone vibrated against my ribs exactly 3 days later. I was sitting in my home office, quietly reviewing a massive commercial lease agreement, when the harsh, unfamiliar buzz abruptly broke the heavy silence. I immediately locked the heavy oak door, pulled the small phone from my jacket pocket, and answered without hesitation. Harrison did not waste a single second with polite pleasantries or casual introductions. His voice was grim, gravelly, and entirely stripped of any human emotion. He told me that his elite forensic accounting team had spent the last 72 grueling hours violently tearing through Trent Lawson's digital footprint. They had dug past the highly polished social media profiles, the glowing professional endorsements, and the beautifully constructed online persona of the successful New York financial broker. What they found underneath all of that carefully manufactured digital smoke and mirrors was absolutely nothing. Trent Lawson, as he presented himself to my daughter and to the entire corporate world, simply did not exist. Harrison started his briefing with the academic credentials. Trent had casually mentioned on multiple occasions that he held a prestigious Master of Business Administration degree from Columbia University. He even had a beautifully framed, embossed diploma hanging prominently in his sleek downtown Denver office space. Harrison's tactical team contacted the university registrar, directly bypassing the standard public verification portals that could easily be manipulated. There was absolutely no record of a Trent Lawson ever attending the business school. There was no master's thesis on file, no student identification number, and no official graduation record anywhere in their secure database. The framed diploma hanging on his pristine office wall was a highly sophisticated, incredibly expensive, and entirely fraudulent forgery. My stomach twisted violently, but I remained perfectly silent, letting Harrison continue down his dark list of criminal fabrications. The professional employment history was the next thing to completely fall apart. Trent claimed to have spent 8 highly successful years working as a senior portfolio manager at a boutique wealth management firm located in Manhattan before relocating to Colorado specifically for Brooke. The forensic accountants relentlessly tracked the corporate registration documents of that specific firm. It was not a bustling high-energy office located on Wall Street. It was a sterile, windowless mail forwarding facility situated in a strip mall in Delaware. The firm was a ghost entity registered under a generic agent name, possessing 0 actual employees and producing 0 reported financial revenue. It was a fake dummy corporation explicitly created for the sole deceptive purpose of providing a verifiable employment history for background checks. Every single limited liability company associated with Trent's past was a total dead end. He had left a highly suspicious trail of 5 different financial businesses registered across 3 separate states over the course of the last decade. Each one followed the exact same predictable criminal pattern. They were opened, operated for a short burst of time with heavily obscured cash flows, and then abruptly and permanently dissolved. There were no physical office assets, no verifiable client rosters, and absolutely no tangible financial products. They were temporary burner companies, designed exclusively to wash stolen money and disappear entirely before the tax authorities could ever ask any meaningful questions. But the most damning, terrifying piece of evidence, the single detail that made my blood run absolutely cold, was his professional licensing. If Trent was actively managing millions of dollars in private wealth, he was legally required to hold specific, highly regulated financial licenses. Harrison's team aggressively ran his name through every single federal and state regulatory database in the country. The Financial Industry Regulatory Authority had 0 record of his existence. The Securities and Exchange Commission had never once issued him a legal trading license. Trent was illegally brokering funds. He was aggressively soliciting millions of dollars from wealthy, unsuspecting investors without a single shred of legal authority to do so. He was operating a massive, entirely unregulated shadow operation right under the noses of the local authorities. Harrison paused, letting the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of the financial fraud completely settle in the heavy air between us. He told me that this extreme level of corporate deception required serious dark funding and a highly coordinated criminal network. Trent was not just a solo con artist looking for a quick, easy payout. He was a highly professional, deeply embedded operative. I thanked Harrison quietly, hung up the cheap burner phone, and securely locked it inside my hidden floor safe. I stood by my window, staring out at the perfectly manicured green lawn of my estate. The man currently sleeping under my roof, the man eating my food and holding my beautiful daughter's hand, was a complete and total fabrication. 2 agonizing hours later, I had to walk into the formal dining room and casually sit directly across from him. Brooke had spent the entire afternoon joyfully preparing a beautiful, elaborate dinner to celebrate the recently accelerated wedding timeline. She had perfectly roasted a prime tenderloin, prepared fresh garlic mashed potatoes, and happily opened a heavy bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon I had been saving for a very special occasion. The dining room was softly glowing with the warm, elegant light of the crystal chandelier. Brooke was beaming, looking completely radiant, happily laughing at a terrible joke Trent had just made as I slowly took my designated seat at the head of the heavy wooden table. Trent sat on my right, wearing a perfectly tailored cashmere sweater, looking completely relaxed and entirely in control of his surrounding domain. He generously poured me a full glass of the heavy red wine, holding the expensive bottle with the easy, arrogant confidence of a man who firmly believed he belonged in a room dripping with immense wealth. I took the glass, forced a warm, highly appreciative smile, and raised it for a family toast. I toasted to their bright future, to the brilliant financial technology venture we were about to launch, and to the absolute success of our wonderful new family. Trent proudly clinked his glass against mine, his dark eyes locking onto mine with that exact same arrogant, predatory smirk I had secretly witnessed days ago. As Brooke happily served the thick tenderloin, Trent immediately launched into a passionate, highly articulated monologue concerning the current state of the global financial market. He smoothly swirled his dark wine, casually dropping incredibly complex financial terminology, eloquently discussing the deep nuances of municipal bonds, bearish market trends, and the extreme volatility of emerging technology stocks. He sounded brilliant, exactly like a man commanding a Manhattan trading floor. Anyone else would have handed him their life savings. I sat there slicing my steak, listening intently. I chewed slowly, nodding, asking innocent questions about his algorithms, watching him spin detailed, beautifully constructed lies right to my face. He did not hesitate. Beneath my calm exterior, cold, ruthless energy pulsed. I was dining with a phantom. I vowed to let him enjoy the illusion of his absolute victory until my financial slaughterhouse was completely ready for him. The waiting was a quiet kind of torture. For the next 48 hours, I carried that cheap plastic burner phone in my pocket like a loaded weapon. I maintained the facade of the generous patriarch, smiling through tedious wedding discussions, and listening to Trent drone on about his phantom financial models. Every time he spoke, I analyzed the cadence of his lies, marveling at the sheer sociopathic ease with which he breathed deception into my home. On the third morning, the email from Harrison Knox finally arrived on the encrypted secure server we had established. I was sitting alone in my home office, the heavy mahogany blinds drawn tightly against the bright mid-morning sun. The house was entirely silent. Brooke had left early for a catering tasting, and Trent was supposedly upstairs on a highly important conference call with his East Coast investors. I unlocked my desktop computer and opened the heavily encrypted file. What I saw on the glowing screen was a masterpiece of forensic dismantling. Harrison's team had successfully cracked the foundational layers of Trent's false identity. Spread across my monitor were 3 distinctly different social security numbers, all actively linked to the name Trent Lawson, but routed through completely separate credit bureaus. There were digital copies of altered bank statements, flagged wire transfers from offshore tax havens, and a comprehensive web of dummy corporations that had been abruptly dissolved the moment they received large infusions of untraceable capital. I leaned closer to the screen, my eyes tracing the exact routing numbers that proved he was nothing more than a highly sophisticated financial parasite. I was so deeply absorbed in the irrefutable proof of his criminality that I failed to hear the soft, deliberate footsteps approaching down the carpeted hallway. The heavy oak door to my study swung open without a single knock. Trent walked into my private sanctuary with the casual, entitled stride of a man who firmly believed he already owned the entire estate. He was holding a sleek silver thumb drive in his right hand, wearing a perfectly pressed linen shirt and a pair of impeccably tailored Italian leather loafers. He looked up, a bright artificial smile instantly stretching across his handsome face. "Victor." "Good morning," he said smoothly, stepping confidently into the room. "I am so sorry to interrupt you, but the printer in the upstairs guest suite is completely out of ink. Brooke needs the updated drafts of the reception menus sent over to the caterer within the hour, and she is absolutely panicking. Do you mind if I just plug this in and print a few quick copies from your machine? My blood ran entirely cold. The secure browser tab displaying his multiple fake social security numbers and fraudulent offshore accounts was currently maximizing the entire width of my dual monitor setup. If he took 3 more steps around the edge of my large walnut desk, he would have a perfectly clear, unobstructed view of the screen. He would instantly know that his entire life was being dismantled. The trap would be completely destroyed, and he would flee with Brooke before I could formally execute my legal strike. Of course, Trent, I replied, fighting to keep my voice low and perfectly steady. Give me just 1 second to save my current work. But Trent did not stop walking. His arrogance blinded him to normal boundaries. He continued his smooth, predatory glide directly toward my chair, stepping behind the massive wooden desk, extending his hand with the silver thumb drive. "Oh, do not worry about saving it, Victor," he said, his voice dripping with condescending politeness. "I will only take a fraction of a second. I just need to drag and drop the file." He was standing less than 2 feet away from me. His arm was actively reaching out to grab my computer mouse. Time seemed to violently decelerate, stretching every single millisecond into an eternity. I could see his dark eyes tracking downward, naturally shifting their focus from the physical mouse toward the brightly lit computer monitors. I had less than half a second before his vision registered the damning financial spreadsheets. I could not simply click the mouse to close the window. The sudden defensive movement would immediately trigger his finely tuned predatory instincts. He would know I was hiding something. I needed a distraction that was so chaotic, so sudden, and so intensely personal that his brain would entirely abandon its visual processing. My right hand was resting inches away from a large, heavy ceramic mug filled to the brim with scalding, hot, black coffee. I had poured it fresh from the thermal carafe less than 5 minutes ago. I did not hesitate. I shifted my weight abruptly, pretending to eagerly roll my heavy leather office chair backward to give him more physical space. As I moved, I purposely hooked my forearm violently against the side of the heavy ceramic mug. The mug tipped over the edge of the desk with a sharp, heavy thud. A massive wave of boiling hot, dark liquid cascaded directly downward, splashing violently over the edge of the desk and pouring directly onto Trent's immaculate trousers and his expensive Italian leather loafers. The reaction was instant and explosive. Trent leaped backward, his body convulsing in pure shock as the scalding coffee soaked rapidly through the thin, expensive fabric of his trousers. A sharp, vicious string of foul, venomous curses exploded from his mouth. He danced backward on his heels, frantically swatting at his legs, completely abandoning the thumb drive, the computer, and the wedding menus. In the exact same moment that he was jumping back in pain, my left hand shot across the keyboard. With one smooth, fluid, perfectly practiced keystroke, I completely minimized the encrypted browser tab, instantly replacing the damning forensic evidence with a harmless generic spreadsheet of commercial real estate zoning laws. I pulled a handful of paper towels from my desk drawer and stood up, adopting the deeply embarrassed, flustered posture of a clumsy, aging man. "Trent, I am so incredibly sorry," I practically shouted, rushing around the desk with the paper towels in my hand. "I was trying to roll my chair out of your way, and my elbow just caught the handle. I am so sorry." "Did it burn you?" Trent stood near the center of the room, his chest heaving. He looked down at his ruined coffee-stained trousers and his completely destroyed leather shoes. Then he slowly lifted his head and looked directly into my eyes. For exactly 1 second, the charming, polite, perfect son-in-law completely vanished. The mask fell entirely off, shattering into a million invisible pieces on the floor of my study. The look he gave me was one of pure, unadulterated, homicidal rage. His dark eyes were cold, hollow, and vibrating with an intense, violent hatred. His jaw muscles clenched so tightly I could practically hear his teeth grinding together. He looked at me not as a father-in-law, but as an obstacle that he desperately wanted to physically eradicate. The absolute malice radiating from his posture was suffocating. The air in the room grew heavy, thick, with the unspoken, dangerous tension of two predators silently sizing each other up in an enclosed space. I held his violently angry stare deliberately, keeping my own expression molded into one of wide-eyed, apologetic concern. I offered him the paper towels, my hand shaking just slightly expertly, playing the role of the frail, regretful old man who had simply made a foolish physical error. I needed him to believe his own narrative. I needed him to believe that I was weak, clumsy, and entirely oblivious. He stood there for a terrible, agonizing moment, the boiling rage warring with his desperate need to maintain his lucrative deception. Finally, I watched the physical effort it took for him to swallow the venom. He closed his eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and forced his shoulders to violently drop. When he opened his eyes again, the dark, murderous glare was entirely gone, replaced by a tight, incredibly forced smile. "It is fine, Victor," he managed to say. His voice strained and noticeably higher in pitch. "It was just an accident. I should not have sneaked up on you while you were working, and I sincerely apologize for the harsh language. The heat just startled me." "Nonsense," I replied quickly, waving my hand dismissively. "You had every right to curse. That coffee was fresh from the pot. Please go upstairs and change immediately. I will pull the menu file from your thumb drive and print the copies while you get cleaned up. I will leave them right here on the desk for you." Trent handed me the silver thumb drive, his fingers slick with the spilled coffee. "Thank you, Victor," he said, maintaining that rigid, artificial smile. "I will be right back down." I watched him turn and walk out of the office, his expensive leather shoes squeaking awkwardly against the hardwood floor. The moment the heavy oak door closed behind him, I let out a long, slow, completely silent breath. My heart was hammering a relentless, furious rhythm against my ribs. My hands were perfectly still, but my entire body was flooded with an intense, burning adrenaline. It was the closest call I had ever experienced in my entire professional life. A fraction of a second later, he would have seen everything. He would have known that I held his fake social security numbers, his dissolved shell companies, and his entire criminal history right in the palm of my hands. But I had beaten him. I had used his own arrogance, his own sense of entitled spatial ownership against him. I walked back around to my desk, picked up the empty ceramic mug, and set it carefully aside. I plugged his silver thumb drive into my computer and quickly printed the elegant, useless wedding menus. Then I sat back down in my heavy leather chair and stared at the closed wooden door. The brief, terrifying glimpse of pure rage I had just seen in his eyes confirmed absolutely everything. Trent Lawson was not just a greedy con artist looking for a quick payout. He was a deeply dangerous, highly unstable individual who felt fully justified in taking whatever he wanted by any means necessary. He thought I was just a clumsy old man in his way. He thought his quick recovery had preserved his flawless illusion. He did not know that his momentary slip, that single second of unfiltered, burning hatred, had completely sealed his fate. I no longer just wanted to protect my wealth and save my daughter. I wanted to completely and utterly destroy him. And tomorrow, when the financial traps finally snapped shut, I was going to gladly watch him drown in the very same dark waters he had tried to drag my family into. The smell of burnt coffee still lingered in the air of my study the following morning. I sat behind my desk, staring at the faint brown stain on the polished walnut wood, a physical reminder of the violent mask slip I had witnessed the night before. I had spent the entire night wide awake, staring at the ceiling, mentally preparing myself for the war that was now fully underway. Trent was currently out of the house taking Brooke to look at expensive catering linens, playing the role of the devoted fiancé once again. The house was quiet. At precisely 10 o'clock, the cheap plastic burner phone vibrated aggressively against the inside of my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and answered immediately. It was Harrison Knox. His voice was rigid and urgent. He did not bother with a greeting. He simply told me that I needed to come down to the industrial office immediately. He said the forensic accounting team had hit a massive breakthrough during the night, and it was not something he was willing to discuss over any cellular network. I grabbed my car keys, bypassed my regular driver, and took my oldest sedan out of the garage, blending perfectly into the busy Denver mid-morning traffic. When I arrived at the brutalist red brick building, the atmosphere inside Harrison's secure conference room was thick with focused intensity. The two forensic accountants were intensely studying a complex digital map projected onto a large screen at the end of the metal table. The map displayed a frantic web of digital routing lines connecting various global locations. Harrison gestured for me to take a seat. He looked exhausted, as if he had not slept in days, but his eyes were sharp and predatory. He pointed a laser pen at the screen. He explained that his team had spent the last 48 straight hours aggressively attacking the digital infrastructure of Trent's supposedly revolutionary financial technology startup. Trent had claimed his algorithms were proprietary and securely hosted on advanced servers located in a massive data center in Silicon Valley. It was the perfect plausible lie to justify the heavy encryption and extreme secrecy surrounding the cash flow. But Harrison's team had successfully stripped away the layers of false proxy servers. They followed the digital breadcrumbs, tracing the exact origin of the Internet Protocol addresses associated with Trent's dummy corporations. The addresses did not lead to a sprawling tech campus in Northern California. They did not lead to Wall Street. They bypassed the standard American financial hubs entirely. The digital trail revealed that the servers were bouncing through a highly obscured offshore network, routing the data through the Cayman Islands and Cyprus, before finally terminating at a very specific, hardwired endpoint. Harrison tapped the laser pen against the screen, highlighting a small, glowing red dot on the map. The endpoint was located in a quiet, unassuming residential suburb of Las Vegas, Nevada. I stared at the glowing red dot, feeling a sudden chilling wave of absolute clarity wash over me. The chaotic pieces of Trent's carefully constructed puzzle instantly snapped into a perfect, terrifying alignment. Las Vegas. The name of the city echoed loudly in my mind. For the past 6 months, Trent had maintained a very strict travel schedule. On the final weekend of every single month, he packed a small leather carry-on travel bag and flew directly to McCarran International Airport in Las Vegas. When Brooke initially asked him about the frequent trips, he had smoothly explained that Nevada was a crucial networking hub for his startup. He claimed he was spending his weekends playing high-stakes golf with eccentric venture capitalists and wealthy angel investors desperately trying to secure the early seed money for his financial platform. He painted himself as the tireless, dedicated entrepreneur, sacrificing his weekends to build their future empire. Brooke had believed every single word, but looking at the digital map, I knew the absolute truth. There were no venture capitalists. There were no angel investors on the golf course. Trent was actively funneling stolen, laundered money directly into that specific residential suburb. He was not flying to Nevada to pitch a startup. He was flying there to physically manage his criminal enterprise, to collect his illicit funds, or to pay off whoever was truly pulling his strings in the dark. The financial technology pitch was nothing more than an elaborate mechanism to drain my liquid assets and send them straight into the Nevada desert. I leaned back in the cold metal chair, lacing my fingers together, keeping my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I told Harrison about the monthly weekend trips. I explained the recurring pattern, the perfectly timed departures, and the smooth lies about angel investors. The lead accountant nodded, typing rapidly into his keyboard, cross-referencing Trent's flight records with the activity spikes on the offshore servers. The data matched flawlessly. Every time Trent landed in Las Vegas, the encrypted cash flow through the dummy corporations spiked dramatically. Harrison looked at me, waiting for my command. He knew exactly what this information meant. Digital forensics could only take us so far. We could track the IP addresses and follow the electronic money, but we needed to know exactly what or who was waiting for Trent at the end of that digital trail. We needed physical, undeniable proof. I stood up from the table, straightening my jacket. I told Harrison that Trent was scheduled to take his next monthly trip to Las Vegas in exactly 2 days. He had already booked his first-class ticket and packed his golf clubs. I authorized Harrison to immediately deploy a team of physical private investigators on the ground in Nevada. I did not want local amateurs. I demanded absolute professionals, former federal agents who specialized in deep cover surveillance. I wanted them waiting at the airport the exact second Trent stepped off the plane. I wanted a complete visual record of every single move he made. I wanted to know what car he rented, what routes he drove, and exactly which house in that quiet residential suburb he was visiting. Harrison confirmed the orders, his tone reflecting the severe gravity of the operation. He assured me that his surveillance team would maintain absolute stealth. They would follow Trent like a shadow, recording every interaction, photographing every associate, and mapping his entire physical network without him ever suspecting a thing. I left the industrial building and drove back to my estate, my mind locked into a state of cold, calculated focus. The stakes had officially escalated from a simple financial con to a deeply embedded criminal operation. When I pulled into my long, circular driveway, I saw Brooke and Trent standing near the front porch, laughing together as they carried boxes of elegant wedding invitations into the house. Trent looked perfectly at ease, his arm wrapped affectionately around my daughter's waist. I parked the car, plastered the warm, jovial smile of a proud father onto my face, and walked up the steps to greet them. I spent the rest of the evening listening to his fake market analysis, silently counting down the final hours until his Nevada flight. The final 48 hours before his scheduled flight moved with agonizing slowness. I played the oblivious father-in-law with an intensity that drained me. I smiled when Trent mentioned his upcoming meetings with imaginary venture capitalists. I insisted on having my driver take him to the airport, offering a firm handshake and wishing him success. The moment his suit disappeared through security, my driver sent a text confirming his departure. Trent was in the air, blind to the fact that his arrival in Nevada was anticipated by men much more dangerous than him. I retreated to my study, locked the oak door, and placed the burner phone in the center of my desk. The waiting was a new torture. It was no longer about discovering his lies, but uncovering the exact depth of his deception. The phone vibrated precisely at noon. Harrison Knox did not offer a greeting. He immediately informed me that his surveillance team had secured visual confirmation. Trent had stepped off his flight at McCarran International Airport. The tracking operation was live. For the next few hours, I sat in the silence of my office, receiving a steady stream of encrypted updates. The contrast between the brilliant broker and the reality of his movements was jarring. Trent did not head toward the corporate boardrooms of the Bellagio. He did not summon a black car service. Instead, he walked to the economy lot and secured a generic gray sedan. The investigator noted that Trent was physically tense, checking his rearview mirror, driving with the erratic movements of a paranoid man. He bypassed the glittering strip, entirely driving into the harsh industrial outskirts, an area defined by cracked asphalt and abandoned warehouses. At 3 o'clock, the burner phone chimed with a secure file transfer. I downloaded the first batch of high-resolution surveillance photographs. My breath caught in my throat. The images were taken through a telephoto lens from a concealed vantage point. Trent had parked his rental car behind a dilapidated auto body shop. The building looked abandoned, but the side entrance was heavily guarded by two massive men wearing dark clothing. The investigators confirmed this was not a venture capital firm. It was an underground gambling parlor operated directly by a ruthless local criminal syndicate. I stared at the glowing screen, swiping to the next photograph. One of Harrison's operatives had successfully infiltrated the dark, smoke-filled interior of the den. The image quality was grainy, captured from a hidden lapel camera, but the subject was undeniably clear. Trent Lawson sat at a circular poker table covered in green felt. He was no longer the polished visionary who had pitched a startup in my dining room. His suit jacket was discarded. His linen shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his perfectly styled hair was disheveled and damp. He was sweating profusely. The hidden camera captured thick beads of perspiration rolling down his pale face. His posture was hunched, defensive, and radiating pure animalistic panic. He was completely surrounded by dangerous men who possessed the cold, dead eyes of professional predators. There were massive stacks of chips pushed into the center of the table, and Trent was staring at them with a look of absolute sickening desperation. The truth washed over me like ice water. There was no algorithmic trading platform. There was no revolutionary financial startup designed to maximize yields. Trent was not an ambitious entrepreneur trying to build a legacy to prove himself worthy of my daughter. He was a degenerate, desperate gambler. He was drowning in syndicate debt, utilizing dummy corporations and fake social security numbers to wash stolen money just to keep his kneecaps from being shattered. He had targeted Brooke because her profound insecurities made her the perfect gateway to my liquid wealth. He needed my $4 million to cover a hole of gambling losses. I sat in the heavy leather chair, my hands gripping the edges of the desk so tightly that my knuckles turned completely white. I felt a surge of violent protective rage aimed entirely at the pathetic sweating man in those photographs. He had kissed my daughter's forehead. He had promised her a beautiful life. He had convinced her that she was finally seen and deeply loved, all while secretly planning to drain our family fortune to feed his ruinous addiction. The updates continued to flood my encrypted device. Over the next 3 grueling hours, the operative documented Trent's spectacular, catastrophic downfall at the table. He was hemorrhaging money. The final photograph showed Trent standing up from the green, felt his face completely ashen, his hands trembling visibly as he desperately argued with a tattooed man standing near the exit. The syndicate enforcer crossed his massive arms and shook his head, pointing a thick finger directly at Trent's chest. The message was universally clear. Time was officially running out. I waited for confirmation that Trent was returning to the airport, assuming he would flee back to Denver in an absolute panic to expedite the theft of my $4 million. But the narrative suddenly took a bizarre turn. Harrison called me directly, his voice tight with raw confusion. He informed me that Trent had exited the industrial warehouse, but he was not driving back toward the airport. He was not heading toward any hotels, and he was not leaving Nevada. "Where is he going?" I demanded, my voice sharp in the quiet space of my study. The private investigators were actively tailing the gray sedan as it merged onto the bustling highway. They tracked him for nearly 40 minutes, driving far away from the criminal underbelly of the city. Harrison relayed the live geographic coordinates. Trent was driving deep into the affluent suburbs of Henderson. The landscape drastically shifted from cracked industrial concrete to perfectly manicured green lawns, wide sidewalks, and large family homes. "He just parked the vehicle," Harrison said, the encrypted line humming softly. "He is walking up the driveway of a 2-story residential property. There are children's bicycles on the front lawn, Victor. This is a family neighborhood." I stared blankly at the wall of my office, my mind racing furiously to comprehend this new, bizarre variable. A degenerate gambler heavily indebted to a violent syndicate had just suffered a catastrophic financial loss. By all logical reasoning, he should be scrambling to secure his escape or begging for his life. Instead, he was standing on the pristine front porch of a suburban home. "Tell your men to hold their position," I ordered, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "I want photographs of whoever opens that front door. I want to know exactly what is waiting for him inside that house." I did not hang up the phone. I sat in suffocating silence, listening to the faint breathing of the ruthless fixer on the other end of the secure line. The carefully constructed facade of Trent Lawson had completely shattered, revealing a dark, pathetic monster underneath. But as I waited for the final photograph to transmit through the digital ether, I knew with certainty that the devastating secret of his entire existence was about to step through that suburban front door. The encrypted burner phone chimed with a sharp digital tone. A high-resolution image materialized on the small screen, perfectly capturing the brightly lit front porch of the suburban Nevada home. I zoomed in on the photograph, my pulse pounding a heavy rhythm against my ribs. The front door was wide open. Standing in the threshold was a striking brunette woman holding a toddler on her hip. Trent stood facing them. His posture was completely transformed. The desperate, sweating gambler from the underground parlor was gone. The polished, arrogant broker who courted my daughter was gone. In their place stood a weary but affectionate family man. He was reaching out gently, brushing the cheek of the young child, while the woman leaned in to greet him with a weary familiarity. My breath caught in my tight throat. I swiped to the next photograph. Trent was stepping inside the house, wrapping his right arm around her waist as the heavy front door swung shut behind them. He was living an entirely separate reality. He had a family, a child, a completely hidden life tucked away in the sprawling desert suburbs, funded by stolen money, and sustained by a labyrinth of carefully constructed lies. Before I could fully process the sickening depth of this double life, Harrison Knox called the burner phone. I answered, pressing the device hard against my ear. Harrison did not waste a single breath. He told me his men had successfully run the license plates in the driveway and cross-referenced the property records. The house was registered to a woman named Clara Vance. The child was a 2-year-old boy. Trent had been maintaining this hidden household for nearly 4 years. But Harrison quickly shifted the focus away from the secret family. He told me that domestic deception was the absolute least of my current problems. The forensic accountants had breached the hidden syndicate ledgers. They had successfully traced the exact flow of the violent money. Victor Harrison said, his voice dropping to a low, deadly register. Trent is not an entrepreneur trying to build a startup. He is a dead man walking. He is currently $2.5 million in the hole to one of the most ruthless underground syndicates operating on the West Coast. I sat frozen in my heavy leather chair. The massive mahogany desk in front of me felt entirely unstable. $2.5 million. The staggering figure echoed loudly in the quiet space of my study. Harrison continued laying out the brutal, undeniable truth. Trent had been a severe, degenerate gambler for over a decade. He had washed money through his dissolved shell companies to briefly keep the cartel pacified, but his losses had monumentally outpaced his sophisticated thefts. The syndicate had finally cut off his credit. They had frozen his dummy accounts and issued a final violent ultimatum. Harrison explained that men heavily indebted to this specific organization did not simply declare bankruptcy. They disappeared, or they paid with their lives. The pieces of the massive puzzle aggressively slammed into place. The sudden, frantic urgency, the unannounced visit to my study, the perfectly polished leather-bound portfolio detailing a revolutionary financial technology startup. Trent was entirely cornered. He had targeted Brooke specifically because she was the deeply insecure, vulnerable heiress to a vast commercial real estate fortune. He had actively hunted my daughter, isolated her emotional weaknesses, and manufactured a flawless romance to gain direct access to my liquid assets. The rushed timeline of the wedding was not born of passionate romance or eager devotion. It was a desperate, panicked ploy to secure a permanent legal tie to my family wealth before the cartel enforcers tracked him down. He needed to pay off his life debt before they broke his legs, or worse. He had pitched the fake fintech investment, asking for precisely $4 million. $2.5 million would immediately go directly to the Nevada syndicate to save his own miserable life. The remaining $1.5 million would likely be funneled into his hidden suburban household to sustain his secret family, leaving my sweet, trusting daughter tethered to a penniless, fraudulent phantom. A dark, primal fury began to build deep within my chest. This was no longer a simple matter of corporate espionage or a standard background check on a prospective son-in-law. This transcended business. This transcended basic greed. Trent Lawson was actively treating my beautiful, fragile daughter as nothing more than a disposable casino chip. He was willing to gamble her entire future completely, crush her tender heart, and casually burn my hard-earned legacy to the ground, just to cover his own pathetic, degenerate debts. He looked at the vast empire I had built with 40 years of sweat and sacrifice, and he saw nothing but an emergency bailout fund for his criminal gambling addiction. I stood up from my desk, my hands clenched into tight, shaking fists. I paced the length of the silent study. I thought about the years Brooke had spent crying in her room, feeling entirely unworthy of love. I thought about how her eyes had finally lit up with genuine joy when Trent placed that expensive, fraudulent engagement ring on her finger. He had weaponized her deepest insecurities. He had wrapped his arms around her and whispered sweet, comforting lies, fully knowing that he was simultaneously planning to financially ruin her and completely humiliate our family. The anger I felt was not the loud, explosive rage of a young man. It was the quiet, absolute, deadly wrath of an aging father watching a vicious predator circle his wounded child. Trent thought he had successfully manipulated a clueless, aging real estate developer. He believed he was the smartest, most dangerous man in the room. He had absolutely no idea that he had just awakened a relentless monster. I had spent decades violently dismantling aggressive corporate rivals, aggressively burying corrupt competitors, and ruthlessly protecting my financial borders. Trent was a desperate amateur playing a game he could not possibly win. I picked up the phone and walked to my desk. I told Harrison to maintain strict, unbroken surveillance on the Nevada house. I wanted to know the exact second Trent left his secret family and boarded his return flight to Denver. I instructed the forensic accountants to prepare the definitive hard-copy dossiers containing every single piece of undeniable evidence. I needed everything perfectly organized, legally airtight, and ready for immediate deployment. Victor, Harrison asked cautiously over the secure line, "What is your exact play here? If you simply deny the $4 million investment he will run before the cartel catches him." I stared out the window of my study, taking a slow, deep breath. I told Harrison that I had absolutely no intention of denying the investment. I needed Brooke to see the absolute truth of his monstrous deception with her own eyes. "I am going to give him exactly what he desperately wants," I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving tone. "I am going to bring him into my boardroom, make him believe the money is within his grasp, and watch him finally fall." The encrypted burner phone on my desk chimed again, breaking the heavy silence of my study. It was a single, high-resolution photograph transmitted directly from the surveillance team positioned outside the house in Henderson, Nevada. I clicked the screen to enlarge the image, my jaw tightening as the digital pixels sharpened into absolute clarity. The front door of the suburban home was wide open. Trent was standing on the neatly swept concrete porch, but he was not alone. A striking brunette woman was standing in the doorway, holding a toddler on her left hip, while another young child clung tightly to Trent's leg. I stared at the screen, my breath turning shallow. Trent was not looking at this woman the way a man looks at a casual acquaintance or a business associate. He was leaning forward, kissing her deeply, his hand resting familiarly on the small of her back. The toddler was reaching out, grabbing fistfuls of Trent's perfectly tailored shirt, entirely overjoyed to see him. It was a picture of domestic tranquility, a perfect quintessential American family, reuniting after a weekend apart. But this family was sustained by a labyrinth of carefully constructed lies and entirely funded by the stolen wealth of unsuspecting victims. My phone vibrated immediately. It was Harrison Knox. His voice was devoid of any inflection, delivering the cold, hard facts with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor. Victor, Harrison said, the line crackling faintly with encryption static. The operatives just pulled the local municipal records for that address. They matched the utility bills, the property taxes, and the vehicle registrations. The woman in the photograph is named Clara Lawson. She is not a mistress, and she is not a girlfriend. They were married 7 years ago in Clark County. He never divorced her. Trent is a legally married man. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of absolute revulsion wash over my entire body. The sheer magnitude of the deception was almost impossible to process. He was actively planning a lavish multi-million-dollar wedding with my daughter, while legally bound to a woman sitting in a house in the Nevada desert. It gets substantially worse. Victor, Harrison continued, his tone dropping into a grim clinical register. We dug into Clara Lawson's financial history. She is not an innocent bystander in this operation. She is a former corporate paralegal who lost her license for embezzlement a decade ago. She is the principal architect of the shell companies. They are running a highly coordinated, incredibly sophisticated domestic scam, and they have done this before. Harrison systematically laid out the brutal, undeniable truth. Trent and Clara were a predatory team. Trent was the charismatic frontman, the polished, handsome operative who could seamlessly blend into high society circles. His specific, calculated target was always the same: He aggressively hunted wealthy, emotionally insecure women who were desperately seeking validation and love. He isolated them, overwhelmed them with manufactured affection, and rapidly pushed them toward marriage before their families could adequately investigate his past. Once the fraudulent marriage was secured, the second phase of their operation commenced. Trent would leverage his new status as a trusted family member to pitch highly complex, entirely fictitious investment opportunities to his new in-laws. He would present polished portfolios for financial technology startups or overseas real estate developments. He would drain their trust funds, empty their liquid accounts, and funnel the stolen capital directly into the Delaware shell corporations, managed entirely by Clara. Once the money was successfully washed and safely transferred to Nevada, Trent would abruptly file for a highly contested divorce, declare personal bankruptcy, and completely vanish from their lives, leaving the broken women emotionally devastated and financially ruined. I sat in my heavy leather chair, gripping the arms so tightly, the wood groaned in protest. I thought about my beautiful, trusting daughter. I thought about the years she spent feeling invisible, the tears she shed over men who never gave her a second glance, and the profound, radiant joy that had illuminated her face when Trent proposed. She truly believed she had finally found her fairy tale ending. She believed she was deeply, unconditionally loved by a man who valued her soul. But to Trent and Clara Lawson, Brooke was absolutely nothing. She was not a partner. She was not a fiancée. She was a marked target on a predatory ledger. She was the sacrificial lamb, perfectly selected and groomed to be slaughtered on the altar of their greed. They had analyzed her vulnerabilities, studied her emotional scars, and utilized her desperate need for affection as a weapon to penetrate the walls of my estate. They intended to take my $4 million to satisfy the violent syndicate debt, and then they would inevitably drain Brooke of everything she possessed, retreating back to their comfortable suburban life in Nevada, while my daughter was left to pick up the shattered pieces of her completely destroyed heart. The anger that seized me in that moment transcended anything I had ever experienced in 40 years of ruthless corporate warfare. This was not about losing money. This was not about a breached contract or a failed negotiation. This was the primal, devastating fury of a father discovering a wolf standing over his sleeping child. The urge to fly directly to Nevada, to kick down the door of that suburban house and physically eradicate the man who dared to play this sick game with my daughter, was almost overwhelming, but I forced the violent impulse down, locking it away in the darkest corner of my mind. Violence would only alert the syndicate, and it would leave Brooke hopelessly confused and traumatized. She needed to see the absolute truth of his monstrous deception with her own eyes. She needed to understand exactly what he was not, because I told her, but because he revealed it himself. Harrison. I said, my voice eerily calm and perfectly steady. I want every single photograph from that surveillance feed printed in high resolution. I want the marriage certificates, the corporate registrations, the property deeds, and the bank routing numbers organized into a single, comprehensive physical dossier. I want it delivered to my personal driver within the next 24 hours. It will be done, Victor, Harrison replied. But you need to be extremely careful. Trent is backed into a severe corner. The syndicate debt is pressing him hard. If he senses even a fraction of hesitation from you regarding the $4 million investment, he will accelerate his timeline. He might try to coerce Brooke into eloping, or he might simply drain whatever accessible funds he can find and disappear into the wind. He is not going anywhere. I promised, my eyes locked on the digital image of the smiling family on the porch. I am going to make him feel completely invincible. I am going to give him the illusion of absolute victory. I disconnected the call and carefully secured the burner phone in my hidden floor safe. I walked out of my study and moved slowly down the grand hallway, the walls lined with framed photographs of Brooke's childhood. I paused in front of a picture taken on her high school graduation day. She was smiling brightly, holding her diploma, standing next to her mother and me. She had looked so full of hope, so entirely oblivious to the cruelty that existed in the world outside our protective walls. I was going to protect her. I was going to shield her from the devastating fallout, but I also knew that the inevitable revelation was going to break her heart. The pain of discovering that her entire romance was a calculated criminal manipulation would be agonizing. But the temporary pain of truth was a necessary surgery to extract a deadly spreading cancer. Trent Lawson thought he was a master manipulator. He thought he had successfully infiltrated an empire and outsmarted an aging patriarch. He believed his Nevada sanctuary was completely secure and that his violent syndicate debts were about to be erased by my hard-earned wealth. He had absolutely no idea that his entire existence was now resting squarely in the palm of my hand, and I was slowly, methodically closing my fist. The final stage of the trap required absolute precision. I had to orchestrate a scenario where Trent would willingly step into the light, completely exposing his own greed and criminality, in a setting where he could not possibly escape or deny the evidence. I needed a theater for his destruction, and there was no better theater than the very boardroom where I had built my empire. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and listened to the sound of the front door opening. Trent was back from his errands, his voice echoing cheerfully as he called out for Brooke. The performance had to continue for just a little while longer. I calmly took a sip of the hot, dark coffee, arranged my features into a warm, paternal smile, and stepped out to greet the man I was preparing to utterly destroy. Trent stood in the grand foyer holding a pristine white box tied with a satin ribbon. He beamed at me, holding up the box to display his supposed thoughtfulness. He had brought back fresh pastries from Brooke's favorite downtown bakery, a gesture so seemingly sweet and incredibly manufactured that it made my stomach physically churn. Brooke came bounding down the curved staircase, her eyes shining with absolute adoration as she threw her arms around his neck. I watched them embrace, forcing my facial muscles to maintain that warm, approving, paternal smile. I told them I was thrilled to see them so happy, but I needed to retreat back to my office to finalize the foundational paperwork for the $4 million venture capital infusion. The raw, unfiltered greed that instantly flashed across Trent's dark eyes was almost blinding. He thanked me profusely, his voice dripping with false humility and manufactured gratitude. I nodded gracefully, turned my back on the smiling couple, and walked directly down the hall. The moment the heavy oak door of my study clicked shut, the warm fatherly facade vanished entirely, replaced by the cold, calculating precision of a corporate executioner. I walked straight to my desk and initiated a secure video conference with Harrison Knox and my most ruthless, aggressive corporate litigator, a man named Sterling Vance. Sterling had spent 30 years destroying my commercial rivals through impenetrable legal contracts, and he was the absolute best in the business. I did not want to simply expose Trent Lawson to the authorities. Going to the police would immediately freeze the situation, but it would also tie everything up in federal bureaucracy for years. Trent might negotiate a plea deal. Clara might claim total ignorance and keep the stolen funds hidden in Nevada. I refused to let that happen. I wanted to execute a flawless, totally legal financial slaughter. I wanted Trent to willingly step onto the execution block, secure the noose around his own neck, and hand me the lever. I explained my exact strategy to Sterling and Harrison. I told them we were going strictly forward with the $4 million investment pitch. We were going to draw up the formal binding legal agreements for the financial technology startup. However, the contract we were going to present to Trent was not going to be a standard venture capital agreement. It was going to be a highly weaponized, incredibly lethal financial guillotine. Sterling listened intently, his sharp eyes gleaming with predatory approval. I instructed him to draft a comprehensive, excessively lengthy contract. I wanted the document to be over 100 pages of dense, mind-numbing legal jargon filled with standard corporate boilerplate text that would bore even a seasoned attorney to tears. Trent was a desperate man functioning under the ticking clock of a violent syndicate death threat. He would not read every single line. He would be too blinded by the prospect of securing the $4 million to scrutinize the microscopic print. Deep within the dense, confusing labyrinth of this massive document Precisely on page 87, Sterling was going to bury the most lethal legal mechanisms we could legally construct. The first mechanism was a comprehensive cross-collateralization clause combined with an unconditional personal guarantee. Trent had spent years hiding behind his sophisticated, anonymous Delaware shell companies, shielding himself from any personal financial liability. This specific clause would completely shatter that protective corporate veil. By signing this document, Trent would be personally guaranteeing the entire $4 million investment against absolutely every single asset he owned, possessed, or was legally affiliated with. I specifically instructed Sterling to word the clause so broadly that it legally bypassed traditional marital asset protections. It explicitly stated that any property obtained with funds routed through his corporate entities would be immediately subject to seizure. This legally chained Clara Vance and the quiet suburban house in Henderson, Nevada, directly to the chopping block. The second mechanism was an absolute, irrevocable, immediate default and forfeiture clause. This section stipulated that if any portion of the underlying business proposal was found to be deliberately misrepresented, fraudulent, or lacking proper federal regulatory licensing, the entire $4 million loan would be classified as immediately defaulted. There would be no grace period. There would be no lengthy arbitration process. There would be no opportunity for a legal defense. The second the ink dried on the paper, any proven fraud would grant me the absolute legal authority to instantly seize all collateralized assets without waiting for a tedious court order. Trent was actively soliciting funds without a valid securities license, pitching a fake company, and utilizing stolen Social Security numbers. He was fundamentally committing massive fraud the very moment he signed his name. The trap was perfectly flawlessly circular. To get the money to save his life, he had to sign the contract. But by signing the contract, he was legally signing away his secret sanctuary and giving me total ownership of his entire existence. Sterling worked relentlessly through the afternoon and deep into the night, constructing the document with the lethal precision of a master watchmaker. He sent me the encrypted drafts, and I meticulously reviewed every single word, ensuring the trap was utterly inescapable. Harrison's surveillance team continued to monitor the Nevada house, confirming that Clara was completely unaware of the impending catastrophe. The syndicate enforcers were also growing restless, their digital communications indicating a rapidly approaching deadline. Trent was running out of time, which meant his desperation was blinding him to everything except the finish line. He was going to walk into my boardroom tomorrow morning, expecting to claim his ultimate victory. He was going to sit across from me, flash his charming, perfect smile, and believe he had successfully conquered my empire. I sat in the quiet shadows of my study, staring at the final flawless draft of the contract, glowing brightly on my computer screen. The trap was completely set. The financial snare was perfectly primed and waiting to violently snap shut. I felt a profound, chilling sense of calm wash over my entire body. I had spent my entire life building walls to protect my family, but I had learned that sometimes walls were simply not enough. Sometimes when a predator breaches the gates, you have to lock the doors from the inside and show them what a true monster looks like. I calmly closed the encrypted file, turned off my desktop monitor, and walked upstairs to try and get a few hours of sleep. Tomorrow, Trent Lawson was going to put on his most expensive suit. He was going to walk into my corporate headquarters, sit down at the massive mahogany table, and willingly sign away his entire life. He thought he was playing a high-stakes game with an old man's money. He had absolutely no idea that he was already dead. The trap was flawless, the evidence was absolute, and the financial slaughter was fully prepared to commence. Exactly 120 hours after his arrival, the ghost was going to burn. I closed my eyes and let the dark stillness take over. I was completely ready. The morning sun broke through the mahogany blinds of my study, casting long, sharp shadows across my desk. The house was buzzing loudly with the joyful energy of the final wedding preparations. Caterers carried silver trays through the hallways, and Brooke was upstairs with her bridesmaids, laughing with a carefree tone I had not heard in years. It was Tuesday, 4 days before she was supposed to walk down the aisle. The contrast between the radiant celebration outside and the dark execution I was about to perform was profound. I sipped my hot, bitter black coffee. At exactly 9 o'clock, a soft knock echoed against the oak door. Trent let himself in before I could even respond. He was dressed flawlessly, wearing a sharply tailored charcoal suit that radiated false success. He carried a leather briefcase, his posture exuding the relaxed confidence of a man who firmly believed he was standing on the edge of absolute victory. "Good morning, Victor," he said smoothly, flashing that bright, manufactured smile as he walked toward my desk. "Brooke mentioned you wanted to see me." "Everything is perfect, Trent," I replied, my voice warm and calibrated to project the image of a sentimental patriarch. "Please take a seat." I poured him a cup of coffee. "I wanted to talk to you about your future, about our family's future." I sat down heavily, letting out a theatrical sigh that implied the weight of passing a torch. I pulled out the thick leather-bound folder containing the investment contract Sterling had meticulously drafted the night before. I placed it squarely in the center of the desk. "I have spent the last 40 years building this empire." "Trent," I began, my voice dropping to an emotional register. "I fought ruthless competitors and sacrificed to ensure my family would always be protected. But an empire is only as strong as the people who inherit it. Brooke is my entire world. When she looks at you, I see a joy I honestly feared she might never find." Trent leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk, his dark eyes adopting an expression of deep reverence. He was playing his role flawlessly. "Victor, sir. I cannot even begin to tell you how much that means to me," he murmured softly. "My only goal is to give her the life she deserves, and to make you proud to call me your son." I forced a genuine-looking smile, fighting the intense urge to reach across the desk and wrap my hands around his throat. Instead, I placed my hand firmly on the thick legal document and slowly slid it across the polished wood until it rested directly in front of him. "I know you will, Trent," I said softly. "That is exactly why I had my legal team expedite this paperwork. This is the finalized formal agreement for the $4 million venture capital infusion into your startup. I want the funds actively wired into your corporate accounts before you leave for your honeymoon. Just take care of my little girl, Trent. This is my legacy." I watched the unfiltered greed ignite behind his dark eyes. It was a momentary flash of pure predatory triumph, but I saw it with absolute clarity. He thought I was a sentimental aging fool, completely blinded by a father's love. He looked at the thick stack of papers and saw only his salvation. He saw his violent syndicate debts disappearing and his secret family in Nevada secured by my stolen wealth. He opened the leather folder, his fingers trembling just slightly with anticipation. The contract was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, stretching over 100 densely packed pages of complex corporate jargon. Trent was completely out of time. The invisible ticking clock of the Las Vegas cartel was deafening in his ears. He flipped past the first dozen pages, his eyes scanning the dense paragraphs with a frantic, superficial urgency. He was not reading the terms. He was actively hunting for the single page that truly mattered to his survival. He found it near the back of the massive stack. The wire transfer authorization form, detailing the release of $4 million directly into his designated Delaware Shell Company accounts. I watched his shoulders drop as a heavy breath of relief escaped his lips. He had completely skipped over page 87. He had entirely bypassed the lethal cross-collateralization and immediate default clauses. He had no idea that by signing this document, he was unconditionally guaranteeing the loan with every single asset he legally possessed, including the quiet suburban house registered to Clara Vance. "Do you need me to call Sterling to walk you through the equity distributions?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Or would you prefer to have your own legal team review the operating covenants before we proceed?" Trent let out a soft, dismissive chuckle, reaching into his breast pocket to retrieve an expensive fountain pen. "Oh, that will not be necessary, Victor," he said, his voice practically vibrating with suppressed excitement. "We have already discussed the broad strokes, and I trust you completely. I know your team uses standard corporate boilerplate. I just want to get this finalized so I can focus on the wedding." He uncapped the fountain pen and flipped directly to the final signature pages. The scratching sound of the metal nib against the parchment paper echoed loudly in the quiet study. He signed his name on the primary agreement. He initialed the aggressive liability waivers. He signed the personal guarantee clause without glancing at the legally binding header. With every fluid stroke, he was methodically wrapping the financial noose tighter around his own neck. I sat perfectly still, watching him execute his own downfall. He was legally binding himself to the guillotine I had forged. The moment he deliberately solicited those funds for a fraudulent enterprise, he triggered the immediate default clause. The trap was now fully operational. He closed the folder, smoothed his hand over the leather cover, and pushed it back across the desk toward me. He capped his pen and offered me a smile of profound, arrogant victory. "It is done, Victor," he said smoothly. "I will personally ensure this investment yields returns beyond your wildest expectations. You are funding our family." I placed both of my hands flat on the mahogany desk, feeling the cool, smooth surface ground me. I looked directly into his dark, calculating eyes, allowing my own smile to slowly widen. It was the sharp, dangerous smile of a predator who had finally secured the cage. "I have absolutely no doubt about that, Trent," I replied, my voice steady and completely devoid of mercy. "I look forward to seeing exactly what you bring to the table." I stood up and extended my right hand. Trent grasped it, shaking my hand with a firm, masculine grip. He truly believed he had just conquered my world. He turned and walked confidently out of the study, leaving me alone in the silent room. I looked down at the closed leather folder resting on my desk. The ghost was finally trapped in the machine. Now it was time to burn it all down. A blinding white light filled the room, instantly silencing the lingering whispers. The image that materialized on the massive screen was not a montage of childhood memories or romantic vacations. It was a stark, high-definition scan of a Clark County marriage certificate. The names printed in bold, undeniable black ink were Trent Aaron Lawson and Clara Marie Vance. The date clearly showed a union forged 7 years ago, entirely active and legally binding. The grand ballroom fell into a silence so absolute, so suffocating, that the hum of the ventilation system suddenly sounded like a roaring engine. 150 influential guests stared at the screen, their champagne flutes hovering forgotten in the dim light. I watched Trent out of the corner of my eye. The arrogant, triumphant smirk melted off his face, replaced instantly by the pale, rigid mask of a trapped animal. Before the room could fully process the legal document, the screen shifted. A high-resolution video began to play, captured just 48 hours ago by Harrison's elite surveillance team. The footage showed the bright sunlit porch of the quiet suburban home in Henderson, Nevada. There was Trent wearing the exact same casual clothing he had packed for his supposed venture capital meetings, standing in the doorway. The audio was crisp and clear. A beautiful brunette woman stepped into the frame holding a toddler on her hip. Trent leaned forward, wrapping his arms around her waist, and kissed her with a deep, practiced familiarity. The toddler reached out, grabbing his shirt, yelling out a joyful greeting that echoed through the stunned ballroom. The video continued, showing Trent walking inside the house, the quintessential family man, returning to his hidden domestic sanctuary, completely funded by the stolen wealth of his victims. A collective audible gasp rippled through the sea of guests, but the execution was not yet complete. The screen faded to black, and the massive audio speakers positioned around the ballroom crackled to life. It was a pristine, digitally enhanced audio recording captured days ago from the hidden microphone placed near the estate balcony. Trent's voice, stripped of all its manufactured charm, echoed violently through the silent room. He was speaking to his hidden wife on his burner phone, his tone dripping with absolute, unfiltered disgust. I heard him complaining about the tedious wedding preparations, about the suffocating nature of his deception. And then came the final lethal sentence delivered with a callous, cruel sneer. "I would rather chew glass than touch that desperate cow." but the old man's money is almost ours." The words hit the opulent room like a physical shockwave echoing against the crystal chandeliers and the silver centerpieces. Next to him, Brooke stood perfectly still. The delicate crystal champagne flute slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a sharp, violent crash, shattering into hundreds of tiny, jagged pieces that scattered across the polished surface. The sound broke the paralysis that had gripped the room. Brooke slowly turned her head to look at the man sitting beside her. The profound, trusting adoration that had illuminated her face just moments ago was entirely gone, replaced by a hollow, devastated shock. Her beautiful silk gown suddenly looked like a tragic costume. She stared at him, her chest heaving as the horrific reality of his deception crashed down upon her. She realized in that exact moment that every kiss, every romantic promise, and every comforting whisper had been a calculated predatory lie. She was not a cherished partner. She was a marked target. Trent launched out of his chair, knocking his heavy silverware to the floor. His face was a mask of absolute sweating panic. He raised his hands defensively, stepping toward my daughter, his voice cracking as he desperately tried to salvage his ruined operation. "Brooke, please, you have to listen to me," he stammered, his eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for any possible exit. "That is not real. It is a fabrication. Your father is trying to frame me. That video is an artificial manipulation, a deep fake created to destroy us. He is jealous of our happiness. Please, sweetheart, you know me. You know my heart." He reached out to grab her shoulders, attempting to utilize the very same emotional manipulation that had brought him into our lives. He actually believed he could still lie his way out of a burning room. Brooke did not shrink away. The crushing weight of her devastation instantly hardened into a fierce, blinding rage. She did not shed a single tear. She stepped forward, planting her feet firmly, and swung her right arm with every ounce of strength she possessed. The sharp, resounding crack of her hand striking his cheek echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. Trent stumbled backward, his hand flying up to cover his rapidly reddening face, his eyes wide with genuine shock. He had expected her to crumble into a sobbing, hysterical mess. He had drastically underestimated the strength of the woman he had tried to break. "Do not ever touch me again," she whispered, her voice shaking with a cold, absolute hatred. "Do not ever speak my name again. You are absolutely nothing." At the far end of the long dining table, the two hired actors who had been brilliantly playing the roles of Richard and Susan Lawson realized the situation had catastrophically collapsed. Their charming grandparental facades vanished entirely. They exchanged a brief, panicked glance, silently agreeing to abandon their lucrative contract. They slowly stood up, leaving their vintage champagne and roasted tenderloin untouched, and began to casually shuffle backward away from the escalating confrontation. They moved with the quiet, urgent desperation of rats trying to escape a sinking ship, slipping past the shocked guests, attempting to blend into the shadows near the rear exit of the grand ballroom. They clearly assumed they could simply walk out the back doors, hail a cab, and disappear into the night before the authorities arrived to sort out the spectacular mess. But I had anticipated every single movement. I slowly raised my hand, snapping my fingers sharply. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the ballroom were instantly pushed shut. 4 massive men in immaculate black suits stepped out of the shadows, their earpieces glowing faintly in the dim light. My elite private security detail moved with cold, synchronized, flawless military precision. They physically blocked every single exit, crossing their thick arms and staring down the 2 terrified actors. The actors froze their eyes wide with fear as they realized they were entirely trapped inside the very cage they had helped construct. They were now completely at my mercy, with absolutely nowhere left to hide. There would be no quiet escape. Everyone in this room who had participated in the psychological destruction of my daughter was going to face the absolute terrifying consequences of their greed. I smiled, the sweet taste of victory replacing the bitter ashes of deception. I looked directly at Trent, watching the realization dawn on him that his entire criminal enterprise was dead. The performance was officially over, and the devastating consequences of his terrible actions had only just begun. Trent collapsed. His long legs gave out completely beneath him, and he fell heavily to his knees right there on the polished hardwood floor of the magnificent grand ballroom. The arrogant, untouchable corporate mastermind was entirely gone, replaced instantly by a pathetic, desperate, trembling coward. He looked up at me, his face slick with a cold, pale sweat, his hands clasped tightly together in a frantic, humiliating gesture of physical supplication. "Victor, please, you have to listen to me," he begged, his voice cracking into a high, reedy whine that echoed terribly in the quiet room. "You simply do not understand the vicious people I am dealing with in Nevada. I had absolutely no choice. The syndicate forced me to do this. They threatened my life. They threatened Clara and my innocent children. I was just trying to survive their brutal demands. I never meant to hurt Brooke. I swear I actually care for her. I can fix all of this. Just give me the $4 million, and I swear to God you will never see me again. I will disappear forever." I looked down at the broken man groveling pathetically at my feet, feeling absolutely zero pity. I calmly reached into the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out a sleek black leather binder. I let it slip smoothly from my fingers, allowing it to drop directly onto the floor, right in front of his shaking knees, with a heavy, definitive thud. "I highly suggest you open that, Trent," I said, my voice ringing out, as cold and hard as glacial ice. "Thanks to that massive, unread contract you so eagerly and willingly signed yesterday morning. In my private study, I just legally foreclosed on your hidden sanctuary in Henderson. Every single one of your fraudulent Delaware shell companies has been completely dissolved by my legal team. Your personal and corporate bank accounts are entirely frozen, and every last cent you thought you had securely hidden has been legally seized to cover your extensive fraudulent liabilities. You foolishly signed away your entire life." Trent stared down at the black leather binder as if it were a highly venomous snake preparing to strike. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly, but absolutely no sound came out. The crushing realization of his complete and total financial ruin was actively paralyzing his mind. I leaned in close, deliberately, lowering my voice so only he could clearly hear the final, lethal mechanism of my elaborate trap. "And there is just one more thing you need to know, Trent," I whispered smoothly. "My lead attorney sent your updated, verified, zero-balance financial profile directly to your violent syndicate creditors exactly 10 minutes ago. They know the venture capital deal was a complete and utter setup. They know you do not have my money. You have absolutely nothing left to offer them. If I were you, I would run." The sheer, absolute terror that completely consumed Trent's pale face was a true masterpiece of human panic. He frantically scrambled backward, slipping and sliding on his hands and knees like a terrified insect, before finally finding his footing on the slick hardwood floor. He did not look back at Brooke. He did not look at his hired actors standing silently in the corner. He turned sharply and sprinted blindly toward the side service exit, violently shoving past the stunned catering staff. He fled into the dark, unforgiving night, with the desperate, panicked speed of a hunted animal, with a confirmed death sentence hanging firmly over his head. The heavy wooden doors swung forcefully shut behind him, leaving a profound, echoing silence in his cowardly wake. I immediately turned my full attention back to my beautiful daughter. Brooke was standing completely frozen in the center of the silent ballroom. Her slender arms wrapped tightly around her own waist, hot tears streaming silently down her pale face. The shattered remnants of her crystal champagne glass lay scattered around her feet, a perfect physical reflection of her newly broken heart. I walked over, slowly, ignoring the staring crowd of silent guests, and pulled her firmly into my arms, holding her tightly against my chest. She completely collapsed against me, weeping softly into the shoulder of my suit jacket. I gently stroked her hair, softly, kissing the top of her head, while she shook with devastating grief. I whispered to her that her true worth was absolutely never defined by the twisted, greedy actions of a ruthless predator. I reminded her repeatedly that she was fiercely loved, profoundly valued, and completely safe within these walls. The subsequent months were a long, incredibly difficult period of intense, entirely necessary healing. The immediate public cancellation of the extravagant wedding ceremony sent massive dramatic shockwaves through our elite social circles, but I expertly managed the media narrative, strictly shielding my vulnerable daughter from the vicious, unforgiving society gossip. Brooke spent the first few difficult weeks quietly grieving the perfect romantic illusion she had so deeply loved. But as the profound, horrifying reality of Trent's monstrous deception fully set in, her deep sorrow slowly transformed into a powerful, highly motivating, and entirely righteous anger. She bravely used that fierce, burning energy to completely reclaim her daily life. She started attending private counseling sessions, working through the psychological trauma he had deliberately inflicted upon her. We spent countless evenings together in my study, simply talking and repairing the foundational trust that Trent had temporarily fractured. Our familial bond grew exponentially stronger, built on a foundation of absolute, transparent honesty. She even began showing a remarkable, previously undiscovered interest in my daily business operations, eager to formally learn the exact corporate strategies I used to protect us all today. She actively threw herself into intense physical training regimens, entirely focused on aggressively rebuilding her physical health and her previously shattered self-esteem. The deeply insecure, terribly vulnerable girl Trent had maliciously targeted was entirely gone forever, replaced by a remarkably strong, brilliantly resilient woman who finally recognized her own inherent, undeniable value. As for my corporate empire, it remained completely secure, functioning flawlessly as an impenetrable financial fortress, guarded closely by a vigilant patriarch who had decisively proven to the world that a father's protective love is absolute, and his righteous vengeance is terrifyingly precise. Predators often wear the mask of a savior, targeting our deepest insecurities to drain our resources and our spirit. True love doesn't demand financial leverage, nor does it rush you into blind commitments. When a parent or a trusted friend warns you about a partner, do not dismiss their intuition as paranoia. Sometimes the harshest truth is the only thing that can save you from a lifetime of ruin. Protect your heart, but always secure your assets. Emotional manipulation is a thief's greatest weapon, but undeniable facts and legal boundaries are the ultimate shield against absolute betrayal. Have you ever ignored a gut feeling about someone only to find out you were right all along? Share your story in the comments below. If Victor's ultimate revenge satisfied you, hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories of betrayal and justice. We will see you next time.